Lula is trying to do this, is create a multinational coalition to restore the Amazon or to save the Amazon. Because right now, the Amazon is in a pretty bad state. It's going through something called a dieback. And what a dieback is essentially the Amazon rainforest itself was formed under very different climatic conditions than today, many millions of years ago. And that region of the world was experiencing regular rainfall. But weather patterns shifted, and all of a sudden the rainforest had to learn to generate its own rainfall. So what happens is every time that, like, wind comes in from the ocean bringing in moisture, that moisture condenses into clouds and then it rains, the roots of the plants will take in that rain. And then after they do their bodies do their stuff with that, they have these little organs all across their leaves called stomata. And they slowly release that water as a gas out of that stomata. And that creates negative pressure, which in turn brings in more water from whatever nearby body of water exists. And this, in turn, when you take that effect and put it across an entire continent, you essentially just generate this river in the atmosphere where all of a sudden rain gets dumped. Then the plants release that moisture through their leaves and then attract more water to the area. And then the whole thing just cycles across the entire continent. The problem is we've now cut down enough of the Amazon to completely disrupt this process. So what's happening is, certain areas start to dry and then fires break out. And, this is an ecosystem that's not in any way adapted for fire. So once a fire gets in there, it just destroys everything. And those regions are then gone. So other parts of the forest all of a sudden start experiencing less rain. They dry, and then they get set on fire. And now we're sort of in this big chain reaction that's going to basically turn the Amazon into a desert unless we restore the forests that have already been destroyed.
So would you say, so basically getting more big picture, reforestation efforts should focus on places specifically to start out, and the Amazon's a great place to start?
I mean, I think reforestation efforts should just focus on the simple fact of if there's a place that can be reforested, it should be. Because, like I said, forests are brilliant at taking out carbon. And right now, we just got to get as much out of the atmosphere as possible. And to go back to this kind of river in the sky that the Amazon is generating, that has global implications. Trade winds, Hadley cells, and various other atmospheric processes will redistribute that water, those rainfall it's generating, to other parts of the world, including like California and Canada. So as I mentioned before, deforestation in the Amazon is actually like having a huge impact on the fires in North America.
If we don't take action, what do you think the world is going to look like in, say, 20, 30 years?
Chaos. Absolute chaos. I think what is going to happen is pretty much every government in a region of the world that is considered hot is going to fall apart. I think if you want an idea of what the world's going to look like 20 years from now, if we don't fix anything, I think the best idea of what that's going to look like is the Syrian refugee crisis, because that was caused by climate change. The Arab Spring that triggered that whole process was caused by a human-induced heat wave that led to crop failures, and in turn, people just fleeing the region, heading to urban areas, fights breaking out. And, that had global impacts as well. I mean, that was a huge factor in the right-wing kind of shift we're seeing in Europe right now. That sort of xenophobia from that influx of migrants from Syria. So what I would expect in about 20 years is, just millions and millions of people fleeing from, hotter regions of the world and seeing a massive rightward shift in governments as a result.
If we do take action, what do you think it could look like in 20, 30 years?
I think the world would be an amazing place. I mean, the reality is, in order to combat climate change, we have to restructure so many different parts of our lives. For example, like economic growth, GDP. This is something we can't continue. We cannot decouple energy consumption from GDP, which means basically as long as we keep GDP going, we cannot get off fossil fuels. So really, we'd have to restructure the economy in a way that, helps people, it improves people's well-being. We'd have to implement social programs like, we do see in the Nordic countries, which I do think are world leading examples. So I think right there, we'd have economies that are where the objective of the economy is no longer growth, but rather human happiness. Which right there I think is absolutely wonderful. I think the world would be much more full of nature. I mean, the amount of areas we could restore, it would just be amazing. I mean, imagine intact Amazon rainforest, whales everywhere, seagrass beds restored, all of this. Imagine just basically being able to like walk out of a city and the next thing you know, you're in the wilderness. That's what it would look like. And that's the kind of level of restoration that needs to be done.
That kind of, and I'm not saying like this is a total example, but that sort of makes me think of Vancouver, British Columbia a little bit, where
I've
it's
not been there.
like oh, I mean, it's not like a total example of what you're describing, but there's just tons. I mean, it's a city and it's a very wonderful city. I like Vancouver a lot. But there's just this amazing rainforest all around it. And you can like hike one of the most beautiful suspension bridges I've ever seen, and then be, in a city center having lunch in the same day. And it's when you see places like that, and I'm not saying like, Canada's leading the way in anything or anything like that. It's just a naturally beautiful place, and it looks like they, make some effort to preserve it. Um, you kind of think, man, we got to do better than this. We got to do better. Because like, look at this. This is worth fighting for. This is worth saving. Um, but so how optimistic are you?
I'm not. In short,
Mm,
I I mean, I'm looking at what I'm seeing right now. So, when I was saying that Scotland, relative to other nations, is doing well, in terms of restoration, all things considered, they're still not doing that great. For example, reintroduction of wolves is right now off the table. The political situation in Scotland is not great for the reintroduction of wolves, which that's another thing that needs to happen. I mean, if you're looking at like, there's this thing called chronic wasting disease, which is it's sort of like mad cow disease, but for deer. I don't know if you're familiar with what mad cow is, or
Yeah, no, I remember when we've had a couple outbreaks of it. I'm not. I mean, you'll have to explain a little bit the connection to wolves, to me.
oh, I'm
But
I'm getting to that. I just want to make
okay,
sure
yeah,
the
yeah,
groundwork
okay.
is set there. So chronic wasting disease is sort of like, yeah, mad deer or something. And what it is kind of a wasting disease, a prion disease. It's a protein that gets introduced to your body and then gives different instructions to a bunch of other proteins in your body. And as a result, like, it basically causes your fundamental biological systems to malfunction.
Mhm.
And what's happening is it's now spreading amongst deer population like crazy. It's pretty much in every deer population in the United States. Just got to Europe. It's still very early stages there. But what's really scary is, first off, we don't know what the mechanism of transmission is. We don't know how the hell it's getting between these deer, but it's now moving to other species. So human to human transmission is something that is entirely possible. In fact, I've spoken to doctors in Pennsylvania who think they actually found a few cases, but weren't able to successfully diagnose it, from hunters who ate venison. And
Oh
the
my
way the
god.
wolves factor into this is that, when the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, they had a whole ton of impacts on it. But one of the things they did was they came in and essentially, like, by scaring deer and causing deer to avoid certain areas because the deer knew they'd be hunting, they essentially enforced social distancing between the deer populations. And as a result, basically, like, the spread was like slowing down. And on top of that, what they do is, individual deer with this disease, what they can do is, they're so much easier to hunt because they're all disoriented and zombie like. So the wolves come in and take these deer down and eat them. And unlike other mammals, wolves are immune to this. So their stomachs actually break down the protein as opposed to like it destroying their body. So the way the wolves come into this is essentially they are our best preventative measure against this disease from actually like spreading amongst us.
So we need to eat local, get some wolves, reforest, and then we got a shot.
Oh, I mean that's just one thing. Like I said, this is insanely complicated. Another thing
Of
is we need
course.
woolly mammoths back, for example. I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with that whole kind of thing.
You
Do you
would
know what
need
the
to walk me
permafrost
through
is?
that too. Yes.
Okay,
I
I'm
mean,
happy to. I'm happy
any
to.
any species you name, I'm gonna need a little hand holding. It's like, yeah, I know what it is, but how does this connect to the bigger picture?
I understand, and
I
yeah,
mean,
this is
I'm
what I'm
gonna
saying,
be
and this is what.
this interview. I'm gonna be a big hit at parties from here on out. I mean, next time I'm at a social event, I'm gonna be like, you know why we need wolves? They're gonna be like, what? And I'm like, wolves. Let me tell you about it. If
Well,
there's something that we real if there's something we really need bats for, you need to tell me right away because I love bats.
oh no,
So
we absolutely need bats too. Bats
great.
are amazing insect control. They dramatically
Yes.
reduce mosquito numbers, and reduced bat populations are linked to increased malaria cases.
Okay, so I did know that actually. Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
yeah.
hey,
Now
look
that
at
you
that, man.
repeat it, I did I have heard that. All right, so woolly mammoths. How do we what do they
Yeah,
got to
so
do?
this is part of my background is, when we left Africa, we essentially destroyed all sorts of populations of species. The thing to note is that a lot of the world used to look like Africa. Like you're in California, right?
Yes.
So California, you would have also had mammoths there. You would have had saber-toothed tigers. You would have had armadillos the size of cars. And these animals would have been alive today had humans not entered that ecosystem thousands of years ago. Now, I'm sure you're probably thinking, like, oh, this all happened thousands of years ago. How's that relevant to today? But what we got to understand is nature does not operate on our timescales. 80 years, the human lifespan, that is a blink of an eye. In fact, our entire existence as a species is relatively a blink of an eye. Life on Earth has been around for 3.5 billion years, and anatomically, modern humans have only been around for 300,000. But, anyways, so we leave Africa, and the reason Africa is the only place that still looks like Africa is because all these animals there co evolved alongside us. They knew what we were capable of. But these other animals, never seen a human before in their life, they were very easy for us to take down. And, when you're talking about something like an elephant or a woolly mammoth, these things, their pregnancies were, over 18 months. It takes a very long time for that population to replenish. So the animal gets overhunted very easily. And unfortunately for us, these animals had very important parts in kind of these biogeophysical processes, as they're called. The woolly mammoths, in layman's terms, were essential for preserving the permafrost. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Vaguely, very vaguely.
So the permafrost is essentially a layer of dirt that is supposed to stay frozen year round.
Mhm.
And there is a ton of carbon, a ton of methane, ton of just nasty stuff frozen in it. And us heating the planet has begun to cause the permafrost to thaw. And
Mhm.
if the permafrost thaws a certain amount, it's basically guaranteeing the whole thing to melt. And it's going to, at minimum, release about 3 times the carbon we have in our atmosphere right now. And like I
Mhm.
said, we have enough carbon in the atmosphere right now to basically just end everything. So it's like, this cannot melt. Now, the way woolly mammoths factored into this is snow can act as insulation. This is how an igloo can keep people warm. And you had the woolly mammoths, you had giant hairy rhinos, giant hairy deer, all these animals clearing snow during the winter to get at the vegetation underneath. So not only do they clear the snow, but they ensure the permafrost would stay exposed to the frigid Siberian winter. And that would ensure the permafrost stayed frozen. Now
Mhm.
that they're gone, the snow just builds up over the entire winter, and then the snow melts, and all the permafrost gets exposed to is the rapidly increasing summer temperatures. So without the woolly mammoths, this whole thing is beginning to thaw and collapse, and it's just belching out large amounts of greenhouse gases. I mean, you can see footage of like certain areas in Siberia where it's like the entire earth looks like bouncy castles because all the ground beneath it has like unfrozen, and there's just a ton of gas just waiting to come out.
So, wow. All right. So this list keeps getting Ronan, this list keeps growing, and I feel like we're going to need a few more people to help out here. I mean, I can, I'll spearhead the woolly mammoths. I volunteer for that, but we're going to need at least 5 or 6 more people.